Welcome, everyone, to this Professional Development Hour presentation brought to you proudly by the Atlanta Metro chapter of the Georgia Society of Professional Engineers, an affiliate of the National Society of Professional Engineers. This presentation is brought to you tonight live from Wild Wings Cafe in Dunwoody, Georgia. Before we begin, we'd like to let you know that any opinions presented tonight are solely the opinions of the presenter and not that of the Georgia Society of Professional Engineers, the National Society of Professional Engineers, or any other of its affiliates. We certainly hope you will enjoy tonight's presentation, so sit back and relax, and on with the show.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jesus Sandoval. I'm the president of the Atlanta Metro chapter of the Georgia Society of Professional Engineers, and I'd like to welcome you to this evening's presentation. Before we get started, I got a couple of announcements for you. First one is I'd like to encourage you to join, if you haven't already done so, NSPE. NSPE is the premier organization that advocates for the interest of our profession, professional engineers, and it is a great opportunity to volunteer and to get some experience and to help the profession. You can be involved at 3 levels, at the national level, at the state level, at the local chapter level. Before we get going, our presentation today, which is on electric vehicles and the growth and the implications of that growth, I'd like to make a couple of other announcements. One of them is we've got our sister chapter, the COP chapter. They are be holding a meeting, their monthly meeting, on Wednesday, the 11th, at the Kennesaw State University Student Center. Our next monthly meeting will be next month, obviously. It's going to be on June the 13th. We don't have a topic on it yet, but it will be here. We also are planning a planned tour to the Curiosity Lab, and that is slated for June 2nd, around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And for those who are not familiar with it, these are automated vehicles, drivers, and it's located in Peachtree Corners in Norcross. Okay, very well. Our presentation, as I mentioned earlier, is electric vehicles, growth implications. Our speaker today is Representative Brad Thomas. He is a PE. He started getting involved with technology when he joined the U.S. Navy. Thank you very much for your service. After leaving the Navy, he received his Bachelor's of Mechanical Engineering from Georgia Southern, correct? And he is a PE. So I'd like you to join me in welcoming Brad Thomas.
Do I need to? Okay. Well, thank you all very much for having me tonight. I appreciate it. I always like to start off with a joke, so I would tell my favorite engineering joke. Y'all know the difference between an optimist, a pessimist, and the engineer? An optimist looks at the glass half full, the pessimist looks at the glass half empty, and the engineer looks at the glass as twice the size it needs to be. So there's my corny joke of the night. So as you were so kindly introduced me, Jesus, I am a registered mechanical engineer. I'm actually the only registered engineer in the General Assembly right now, and begging anyone that may want to join to please come and be a part of the General Assembly. I could use some help. So it's an interesting time. And before I get too much into the electrification of automobiles, I did want to talk a little bit. So as you alluded to, I'm actually a registered professional engineer. I own my own company. It's called Capital Projects. We are a new company, but we've been very fortunate that when we opened our business, first thing we did was we opened up with prayer, and God's been really good to us. And we do the hard work, but He opens the doors. So, and I contribute a lot of my success to Him, and I like to let people know that. So, with that being said, so let's talk about the exciting stuff. So the electric vehicle and where we're going with technology and automobiles, literally we're going to see the jump from, at one time was the horse and carriage to the automobile. Well, now we're taking the automobile and just pushing it so far beyond what it was, obviously 100 years ago. So it's not just electrification. We got to think about how, right now we have a motor fuel gas tax, right? Well, electric cars obviously don't fill up at the gas pump, so we have to think about what implications we have to our infrastructure and how do we fund that infrastructure. Probably one other thing I should talk about on my other side, as my duties as a state representative, I actually serve on the Energy, Utilities, and Telecommunication Committee, specifically in the Energy Subcommittee. And I also serve on Transportation, which puts me in a very unique position to be working on this type of legislation and policy for our state. One of the things that we did do this past session is we passed a bill that creates a special study committee, and the study committee is it's actually a joint study committee between the Senate and the House, and it's literally called the Study Committee for Electrification and Transportation. In order for that to happen, you really have to look at it. We're engineers, so we break things into parts, right? So the first thing we have to look at is effects on infrastructure such as our roads and funding. That's government, we're always about trying to figure out how to deal with funding. And that's another engineering joke, sorry. That was the best I could do there. Now, the second part we have to think about is the infrastructure to charge these cars. Because of course you could charge at home, but let's be honest, so I've got 2 kids, I've got a wife, we like to go to the beach. And if I can't make it to the beach on one charge, then that's a problem, right? So we have to think about how do we write policy in a way that helps private enterprise and the private sector be successful in building what it needs to build in order for not to have the range anxiety. Because I mean, if you think about it, even back in the day when we went from the horse and carriage to the car, well, there wasn't a gas station on every block, right? So this isn't something that's new, it's just a reincarnation of an old problem. So the other part that we have to think about is how, and this is really such a great topic to bring up, and I really would like to talk with you all about it today, but how do we go from the refinery to the power plant? Because everybody thinks, hey, I just plugged my car in. Well, that energy has to come from somewhere, right? And what we're doing is, right now we have a diversified energy portfolio with fossil fuels, and as we decide that we're going to pull that away and go strictly electric, well, now all of a sudden we've decided we're going to go sole source on not just the power for our homes, but the power for our vehicles as well. And that power has to come from somewhere. It has to come from one of these power plants. And where's that delta at, right? I mean, how are we going to get there? Especially, I believe that it was GM, I may be off one way or another here by 10 years, but I believe they said 2034 they will no longer produce gasoline engines. They're going to go straight electric, 2034, okay? Then most of us on the transportation committee, or there was many of us that were invited to actually Mercedes, which is literally just like right over here. And we toured their electric cars and we talked with some of their engineers, and one of their big pushes is also 2029 to really try to get away from the gasoline engine. So I know, and these are like really aggressive, but the beauty of what we do in the legislature is, so, and I don't know, are you familiar with how the state of Georgia works when it comes to how our General Assembly, it's not like U.S. Congress. I mean, it's still bicameral. You have a Senate, you have a House of Representatives, but we only meet for 40 days out of the year. So we're not passing laws all year, and I can tell you the best thing that could ever happen to anybody in this room is people not passing laws all year long. It just doesn't work. So, but what we do is everybody brings their skill sets, right? It's a citizen legislature, so you have lawyers, probably more than we should have down there. Then we have doctors, we've got farmers, real estate agents, and one engineer. And we all come together and we bring that knowledge to write policy that actually makes sense for the state. A lot of times you'll see a lot of, there's always concerns about vitriol between, where do you fall on the left and the right. I would say for the most part, at the state level, it's pretty good about working together. Yeah, we do have partisan times but for the most part, if you look at our bills, they usually pass. I'd say probably about 90% of them pass unanimous across both parties. So I think it's about common sense solutions. So this is the part where I said that I didn't want to do necessarily a monologue tonight. I wanted to do a dialogue. So I wanted to talk a little bit about a couple of the categories. First one was, okay, well, we have to set public policy. We know we're going to get away from motor fuel tax. Does anybody have any ideas of how you think you would take and try to find a tax or a way to make up that revenue, the lost revenue from fuel?
Yes, my understanding is that the legislature several years ago already took care of that funding gap, and what they did was they increased the title tax so that the electric cars, every time they go and renew their license, they have to pay a fee that is equal to running exactly twice the number of miles that the average gasoline car runs. That is 24,000 miles per year rather than 12,000 miles per year.
So thank you. You're talking about the $200 fee. Yeah, so we're aware of that. Now, what you just brought up, some people don't feel like that's a fair fee to have to pay. Now, I've heard 19,000 miles, so I guess, I'd have to see your calculations. So. Sorry, engineering joke. That's a tough crowd here tonight, okay? But that's actually something that that is supposed to be or possibly looked at during the transportation, this upcoming electrification and transportation committee, is that because we've actually heard that feedback that people feel like they're paying more through that $200 than, that actually came up with Mercedes. When we were at the Mercedes plant, that was one of the big topics that were discussed. So I think what I hear is you say you don't like that approach, but technically my question is do you have any ideas of how you think we should go about it? And Roger, go ahead.
When I lived in Virginia, part of the license fee was based on the mileage of the car, year to year. And so every time you got your license renewed, the person from the tax office would come out and look at your odometer. Mm-hmm. That was a low-tech way to do it. I have heard of a state of Washington or Oregon has investigated having the car's GPS system automatically report, maybe even daily, so that you get a quarterly bill from the state for what you owe.
We're not going to track people's cars. He promised you that.
I didn't think that would fly.
Although, so there's a couple Navy guys in here. You remember the KISS method, right? Keep it simple, sailor. Actually, that's actually not a bad idea. That might be something that we'll come up with later. All the way in the back.
So I was just a recent invitee. Oh, the orange one. I think it says it's on. Can you hear? Okay. So I have no business being here. My son and I were just out having a dinner, and we were invited in because he's graduating high school and figuring out life, and I'm a chief technology officer by trade, so I do computer science engineering work during the day.
Okay.
So at any rate, sorry to barge in, but driving a electric car, my idea is that there's probably a way from an engineering perspective to understand the line voltage draw of charging an electric vehicle, just like there is a way to understand the line voltage draw of a refrigerator. And on a kilowatt hour basis, there's probably a way to understand a fair tax on the usage of electricity, just as we do on the usage of gasoline, that enables this to all work in a off the radar type way, just like we are able to do with smart homes today. So that would be my idea.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to rebut that very slightly because I have an electric car too, and Georgia Power charges me tax to charge my car.
They do?
Yes, they do. It's on your bill.
Well, sure, yes.
But but that's not a bad idea. I mean, you're going to have to do it somehow on mileage. So people
we have
who
to stick
drive
to
a lot of
mileage.
miles
You know, again, if they're driving a gas car, they're paying the gas tax, miles per gallon. If you're driving an electric car, you need to do almost the same thing. If you drive 100,000 miles in a year, you should pay one tax. If you drive 5,000 miles a year, you should pay a different tax. So that's exactly what's happening with fuel tax.
Would you be willing to pay an extra penny per kilowatt hour as a substitute to the mileage tax?
Possibly. I mean, I'm saying it's not a bad idea. It's just, as you go through this, I think it's got to be on a consumption type basis.
So I look at it right now as the tax is on per unit energy, right? So a gallon of gasoline has so many BTUs in it. No, we know that, right? It has so much inherent energy. So if that's the case, then I think we've got a big investigation in front of us on exactly how because then the feedback that we receive is, well, if you monitor how much power that I'm pulling, then you're tracking how much I use, and the state gets that information, and I don't want you to have that information. And that's the privacy part of it that isn't necessarily as easy. There's a lot of things you can address in a black and white situation, but what I've learned about public policy is you have to throw everything that you know about black and white and what makes sense out the window and common sense and logic, and then you have to look at it as more of a shades of gray. So, go ahead.
Have you factored in the aspect that you can charge electrical cars while they're running? And eventually that's going to be built into the transportation system.
I'll tell you what, I imagine at some point we'll look at that, but right now we don't even have the infrastructure just to charge a local station, so.
That's my point.
Yeah.
For transportation, you need to look at doing that because it extends their travel. That's my point. Mm-hmm. By being able to recharge while you're driving, you extend the range of travel across the entire United States. So it's going to be as big as the interstate system was back in the 50s.
So that's actually the second part, was talking about distribution of energy. The first part. So you're ahead of. I can tell you're already ahead of everybody else. So you're even in the next section. So just to kind of wrap up, this is one of the things that we'll have to look at is how do we capture revenue in a way that makes sense, that's fair for everybody, that still funds our roads, because at the end of the day, these cars do ride on the road, and everybody I've never met anybody that says, hey, look, I don't want to pay my fair share. They just don't want to pay more than their fair share, and I think that's really where the gray area is. So. One more, and we're going to move on to the next topic. Go ahead.
Something for you.
Okay.
You're talking to a bunch of engineers. You're talking to a society that has a bunch of engineers. Why doesn't the state tap into this and let us help you with this problem?
So I've got a great answer to that.
Thank you.
I'm going to call you when the study committee comes,
well, I happen to be
and you can sit down,
also,
and
so yes.
we'd be more than happy to have you provide some testimony on it. All right. So at this point, this study committee has been created. I've asked to be on it. It's just something of personal interest to me, but I haven't been assigned to the committee yet, so I don't know if I'm on it or not. But so with that being said, I think we should move on a little bit to the next part of this conversation, which is, so right now, I've talked a little bit about range anxiety, right? And 100 years ago, going from the horse-drawn carriage to the vehicle, that there was no gasoline, gas stations on each corner. So then we moved on. Eventually there were. We built the infrastructure. So now we have this whole new set of infrastructure, a whole new set of problems, right? So the first thing I'd like to talk about is, does anybody have any idea where all this power is going to come from? Because like I said, if we're not going to take it, if we're taking it out of the refinery, we're shutting those down, that energy has to be moved to somewhere. We have to pick that up. So since we're getting away from a fossil fuel society, and I love green energy, I think it's fun, but the sun's not going to make up this difference. How do we as a society move forward in energy production in a way that would support these vehicles? So I'm going to open the floor up.
All the hot air from DC.
Yeah, hot air from DC. Listen, if you could power off of DC, I mean, I tell everybody unicorn milk, but.
It's disappeared, both of them.
Yeah, it looks like Roger's got both microphones.
Nice.
So, I'm is it on? Yeah, project engineering manager for battery storage.
Okay, very nice.
And we're looking at very large projects.
Mm-hmm.
We're looking at 200 megawatt, 2-hour systems in Texas, but I can tell you California is building a lot, 4-hour systems. So my answer to that would be, you still have to have a combination of, you can't completely get rid of fossil fuels, can't completely get rid of nuclear, but it would be a combined. The biggest problem, as we all know, is the battery, right? Because the battery cannot charge. You can't replace a gas turbine, and I've built gas turbine plants before, so, but you can't, battery, it's not there, technology's not there yet, but you'll have to be a combined, an augmented, a hybrid system. Yeah.
So I think, first of all, what we're going to have to look at is, are we willing to maybe go more combined cycle like you and I were talking about earlier, where we're burning cleaner fuels through through the gas turbines, right? And I'm sure many of you heard the term HRSG before, right? Heat recovery steam generator. So, I mean, I think we have that technology available to us. The beauty of it is they can be run up and shut down. They're cleaner than a coal plant. But even then, just shutting down, I mean, we're going to have to grow that infrastructure. And it's not just that. I mean, and everybody knows, it's like the classic. So I got a 68 Camaro, okay, that's my baby. I tell everybody, I got 3 babies. One's named Gavin, one's named Summer, and one's named my 68 Camaro. So, so it was a lot of fun when I was building my 68 Camaro. I put a killer motor in it, right? Didn't upgrade transmission. Had a pretty decent rear end in it. What do you think happened? I tore through my transmission, right? So it's not that much different from power plant. And we could put a big old power plant in, but if you don't have the electrical lines to get it to the gas station, well, now you've just set your next set of problems. So, but I know we're going to start talk about charging on the interstate when we drive. And I think
basically my suggestion or thought, and by the way, I was a systems engineer in space engineering. And what has happened, by the way, I'm an old one, when we went from town to town square, and then we built an interstate system, and then we used the commuter system out of the interstate system, in other words, evolution. But through all of this, we had people who designed roads and bridges, and we had people in Detroit who designed vehicles. 2 different things. Now you're talking about needing a system where you have an engineering system that analyzes the electrical needs, the road needs, the automobile communication system, the design of the automobile. In other words, you need to be looking at the whole thing, and you have no government structure to do it that I know about.
so. So are you? I guess I don't understand the question.
I'm recommending that you restructure Department of Transportation to include all these other features, that you have experts within the Department of Transportation that knows the automotive industry and works with them, that you have engineers who work with the electrical people so that you have the power to support it. You have a multitude of specialties that need to be integrated so that you have a system that functions the most economically, using the best of our resources economically.
So having you come to the committee too.
Or you get them out of the way.
Just so you know, actually, I checked, as I see right now, I haven't seen any guidance from GDOT that's been put out, so I think you actually are spot on with that comment. So that's something that we'll need to dig into as well. Remember, so one part I didn't tell you is this is actually I'm actually unopposed So we're in an election cycle right now, but I don't have opposition. So I'd say I feel very confident that I'm coming back next year, God willing. I just need one vote, and I can tell you I'm going to vote, so I know I got one. So, being that this was my first term, I'm actually just trying to get into the system and do the things that you're talking about. So I actually really do appreciate the feedback, and it's something that, again, that's why I talked about citizen legislature. These are things that I can bring back, and the feedback that you guys are providing me tonight is, it's a direct line to right policy. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, there's also going back to the way it used to be and let the market come up with solutions on their own and get government out of the way, so that all these millions of people out there with great ideas can come up with solutions. And look, if you got to have a government in there, let them just kind of play traffic cop and help make sure it doesn't go too crazy if that's what you want to do.
So no, I actually agree with you. I think there needs to be some guidance on the direction of the policy and how the state wants to go. But at the end of the day, we want free market. We want the free market to decide. We want business leaders. As a business owner, I can tell you I would much rather work it through my business side than try and work it through the government side. But what we need to do is make sure that the government isn't writing a bunch of red tape that keeps us from doing the things that we feel is the right thing to do. So, but I do think that some direction from GDOT, I think, will be helpful, and that's something we're going to look at. So,
thank you, Roger.
yeah.
So this is, in addition to being important to the state of Georgia, this is a national issue.
It is.
And we have many predecessors, and I'll cite the automated toll collection systems that are scattered around the country, that where you can drive in some regions state to state and it's all integrated. And then there's Georgia that basically has their own system. I think maybe Florida recognizes it now, maybe North Carolina. But this is where the foresight comes in, and getting committee work, but not just within Georgia, but start working with other states. And where's the national government on this? And also, where are the automobile manufacturers on this? Because they're the ones with the target goals and 8 years, 9 years, have an all-electric fleet. Well, they've got to be able to have a market for that fleet, and without the ability to drive interstate, the market's going to be limited.
So I think that to answer your question, I've had a great conversation with Mercedes, and one of their biggest things is get out of the way, let the innovators innovate. That is literally what they said. Verbatim. So the answer, I think first thing you got to talk about is, I always picture it, okay, well, the family of four. If you want to talk about creating a market, right? Well, you got a family of five, a family going somewhere. They got to be able to stop. They need to be able to, fill up their car or charge their car. And they need to do so in a time frame that is, quite frankly, I can't spend 30 minutes sitting here waiting for my car to charge up. So I think that where the innovation needs to be is fast charging systems. Because without a fast charging system, I just don't think you're going to get the buy-in. I'll get with you in just a second. Hold on.
Step in right on the line.
Okay.
I believe Tesla is putting fast chargers across the country right now themselves, so that if you own a Tesla, you can go from point A to point B, stop in the middle, do a fast charger, you're charged in 30 minutes or 45 minutes of time to eat lunch, and then you go. So they're giving their people who own Teslas the ability to run 600 miles in a day if you have a 300-mile range car. You stop one time, you juice up, and you're gone. Not that we have to do that by manufacturer, but that's the type of system that we have to develop somehow across the state.
So right.
I think, let me just add to that, as the Tesla guy.
Yeah.
First, I think everything this fine gentleman said, spot on. It has to become an integrated system. Transportation is changing, and the roads and the way we invest and the way that we charge for that investment, taxes, is going to have to evolve with it.
Agreed.
You have no choice but to figure out how you allow nuclear power to give us a path. You can use solar where appropriate. Until engineers gather together and solve cold fusion, I see no other real great answer. But you can export power. Georgia has an opportunity to lead in the production of power, export that, and use that to invest in its own infrastructure, invest in a system that actually brings it all together, and actually become a leader in this space. It is a real opportunity for Georgia, unlike other states, given where we are today with nuclear power, the investments and ongoing construction and activities. We've got a real opportunity to lead here, and you should seize that.
Georgia does already export power, by the way, to Florida. They have been for years.
So, try to go ahead.
Yes, I'm a real believer in compromise and moving into things, in a paced fashion. And the one thing you hear about all the time are electric vehicles, and we're getting rid of fossil fuels and all this crap. But never do you really hear anybody discuss or address the use of hybrid vehicles, where you have a backup, where you have a compromise. I mean, I'm of the belief that, had we had electric vehicles back during Snowmageddon, the cars would still be sitting out there, and so it's not practical from a standpoint of putting all your eggs in one basket. I'm the kind of person that wants to drive further than 300, even 600 miles in a day. I like to go further than that, and I don't want to fly. So, rolling in the idea of hybrid vehicles and using some fossil fuel to back yourself up seems like a good idea.
Yeah, and the shipping industry's done that for 100 years, where they generate electricity to drive an electric motor. We can do that today with very small turbines, which are highly efficient. They're over 90% efficient, I believe, and do that to generate a small amount of electricity to charge up your batteries when you need it.
I think that'd be probably a question more addressed to an automotive company than me personally. 'Cause
I agree.
It's just, at the end of the day, they're the one they have to look at the market and decide what they feel is going to be appropriate, whether it's that or something else. But I think to me, so right now, so most of you all know the overwhelming majority. Somebody brought up the Tesla chargers. Thank you for bringing that up. That was where I was actually going, and now I got my train of thought back. So, right now, obviously the Tesla chargers are only available to Tesla customers, I think, which maybe that'll open up one day, maybe it won't. I don't, that's neither here nor there. But what's not available via Tesla, there's a good chunk of that that's actually being built by Georgia Power. Okay. So one of the issues that a lot of people have with Georgia Power doing it is the fact that it's in the base rate. So you're paying for that through Georgia Power, through your base rate, and there's a 10% return to Georgia Power on that. So that's where things get a little dicey. I can tell you that there's been legislation down at the Capitol specifically allowing gas stations to put in charging, right? To me, that seems like a common sense approach. You already have a gas station every block. So, but the problem comes into is how you can sell power through a gas station or somebody that's not Georgia Power. So, because Georgia Power is sold by the kilowatt hour. But these other stations, I want to say, it's like by the minute. You have to pay by the minute. So, and I know that we've got some double E's in here that know a lot more about how battery charge. I've got my friend here that's working for a battery storage manufacturer, but batteries charge, but it's not a straight rate. It doesn't go like this, right? That kind of goes more like this, right? So that you get up to, so once you get up to about 80%, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is once you get from 0 to 80, it takes almost the same amount of time to get from 80 to 100. Can anybody say that that's up? There we go. We got a thumbs up from our welcome friend in the back there. So when you buy it by the minute, which is what everybody has to do that's not through Georgia Power, when you're purchasing this by the minute, then you have to ask yourself, at what point am I going to stop charging versus the kilowatt, which is a flat rate per unit of energy. So anyway, that's one of the issues. That's one of the things that we're actually going to be looking at, or that's going to be looked at in the study committee. So, go ahead, Roger.
At the end of April, I attended a Chamber of Commerce Transportation Forum in Hall County. And one of the people there was a regional director of GDOT.
Okay.
He talked about a federal program that is providing some of the funding for them to have charging stations at least every 50 miles along the interstates. Of course, that handles the interstates, but it doesn't handle the rest of the state. So I think the federal government is doing exactly what it does best, spend a bunch of money it doesn't have. So, yes, to answer your question, there is a federal grant program out that's available right now, and that money is available. And there is a big question on how does that money get divvied up? Exactly how do we tap it in a way that makes sense? Because again, I'm a free market principles person. We need to make sure free market is operating the way it's supposed to. And whenever government gets involved, nothing good happens. That's been my experience. So, what's that balance? I don't know, and how we're going to get to it. I have a feeling that you're probably going to see some movement happen after the election cycle here in 2 weeks. Everybody wants to get through the primaries, and at that point we'll open up and wind up looking to see. I think that's when you're going to see the committee really work, because my understanding is the way that particular committee was set up is it has to be done by the first week of December. So you're going to see a whole lot of work done pretty quick in a pretty quick period of time, which is why I'm glad I got to talk to all of y'all tonight, because if good ideas, these are the things that we're going to be talking about, and keep it in the back of your head, because what I see is a room full of problem solvers, and these are the type of people we need down at the Capitol. Another point that's probably dear to most people here, most of the people in this room are PEs, or there's some aspiring PEs. By tradition and by law, PEs are involved in the design of infrastructure. As the technology, and also vehicle design is outside of the purview of engineers. Aircraft, railroads, the railroad vehicles are outside of anything that PEs are required to work on. And as the highways become more technically involved with, say, autonomous vehicles, and you have communication links, the people doing autonomous vehicle development don't want to bother with PEs. So is there places that that demarcation has to be broken down somewhat?
Where's the board guy at? I'll let you answer that question.
With a 10-foot pole.
Yeah, oh, good. That makes two of us.
I have an opinion, but I'll keep it to myself.
Yeah.
We'll talk afterwards.
Roger, I'll need a little time to think that one over. Okay. All right.
Another thing that comes to mind.
Yeah.
I read about somebody who got a patent for measuring the gas left inside of vacuum tubes, and he got his patent in the late 50s, just before vacuum tubes became obsolete.
Okay.
The growth of the possibilities of microgrids could obsolete massive power transmission lines and massive power plants. And our power plants require a 25-year cycle from conception to coming online. That's a big investment cycle. So what happens if the technology becomes obsolete? Well, I've just told that it's a 50-year cycle to get the power plant online.
So to answer that question, I think that you need to contact Georgia Power, because I can promise you're not going to codify anything about anything that you're talking about right there. State law is not going to get involved in how long it takes to build a power plant.
But I know that the utilities are holding. They're holding the market.
Yeah. So we're. I mean.
Question. Okay. You have to elect people to the Public Service Commission who aren't owned by Georgia Power.
Yeah, there's this whole other group called the Public Service Commission, by the way. I probably should have brought them up. These are great questions for them. Yeah. So I can refer you to your I guess commissioner. Yeah.
I'd like to ask a question going back to what you were talking about earlier, where you asked, where is this power going to come from if we're no longer refining oil to be used in gasoline engine vehicles? And most people these days are saying, hey, it ought to come from renewable energy. Well, as we all know, you can't get solar when the sun isn't shining and when you got lots of clouds. But let's move on to wind energy. You look at maps of our country and you look at where the winds blow, and if you look at Georgia, you will find that we are actually one of the worst states in terms of when you look at our land area where windmills would be appropriate to put. We have very, very little, very, very few places that have sufficient winds to be able to do it on land. However, we actually have some of the best places to do it offshore. And my understanding is there is a state law or rule that is preventing us from looking at putting in offshore windmills. Now, I know the federal government in general controls that.
Yeah, that's typically not.
But the state also has to permit it.
I have to look into that. I'm not aware of it, but I'm not going to say it's there. It is or isn't there. I don't know. I'd have to do some more research.
It's no panacea either. It's been done elsewhere, and they've had a lot of problems with it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Having spent a number of years in the wireless industry, I would recommend that you keep, at least in the back of your mind as you're doing policy, interoperability and technical standards. That's not necessarily something that the government would do, the industry would do, but you want to be able to have a charging station, for instance, that a GM car can plug into and not just a Tesla.
See, I couldn't agree with you more. You know what? You know what drives me crazy? So I've got a Droid phone, and my wife has an iPhone, and we can't plug one of our phone cable into the other phone because they have different cables. Their connectors are different, right? So I have the same concern literally about electric cars. I hope they come up with one standard plug that plugs into every different kind of electric car. Did that address your question?
Yeah, it did, but it was even worse in the early days of the wireless industry. Because I worked for Bell South in Singular, and I could take my phone out of Atlanta that worked fine on the Lucent infrastructure in Atlanta, and it wouldn't work on the Motorola infrastructure in Birmingham, and those were both our markets. So the industry had to, over time, start to evolve toward common technical standards to ensure that degree of interoperability that we enjoy today.
So I hope that happens. I'm reminded of the VHS and beta machine. I mean, these wars of, we had Blu-ray, what was it, Blu-ray, and there was the computer, HD, DVD, and these things have gone on for I guess forever, as far as I know, but eventually they always did settle on one just because industry, well, I'd say the consumer decided, I want the VHS or I want the Blu-ray. And sometimes it's whoever puts the most money into it to get the customer.
You can even go back to Tesla and Westinghouse, Edison for AC versus DC.
DC, yeah.
What I was going to say is that electric vehicles will help, I think, somewhat with the pollution aspect of it. But you're taking the pollution out of each vehicle, you're consolidating it, and you're transferring it over to a power plant. Right? Economies of scales, for sure. But what's not being addressed is the congestion part of it. Right? We can't build enough roads for this thing. So I think that change is going to come. What's going to happen is you're seeing it now with Uber and the Uberization. There are several research projects that are going on at Georgia Tech. One of them is the physical internet, and what it does is it offers up capacity on trucks that's not being used to other people so that they piggyback off of it. And they're also doing the same thing with making transportation reliable, because really, owning a car is a loser. It's a freaking loser, right? The car, you drive it for 2 hours a day, and it sits out there for 22 hours. But we've grown up with the attitude and you want to have a car. You want 68, I want my 1986 420 SEL. I wouldn't give that one up. But it's just not practical.
Right.
Would I give it up if I had confidence that if I got on my app and I needed to go from here to there, a car would show up in 2 minutes? Yeah, I'd give it up. And I think a lot of the new generation is not into owning the car. So I guess what I'm saying is, with these things going on, you're still going to need the same infrastructure, right? You're still going to need the roads and the thing, but now you're going to have fewer cars on the road. So how do you make up that revenue, or how do you come up with alternate ways of generating the revenue that's required to build those roads?
Oh, that was a really long. You lost me right at the very end there. So because Uber drivers are picking up people now, and
what I'm saying is that the electric vehicles will address part of the problem that we have, pollution, right? But it's not going to address the problem, the other problem, which I see, which is congestion, more and more vehicles. So as apps and things come up, new ideas to reduce the number of cars that are on the road, you're still going to need the same infrastructure, whether it's electric vehicles or whatever. You're still going to need the same roads to get around, but now you're going to have fewer vehicles circulating.
So I'm going to take that one off in pieces, okay? So the first piece that you had, you're talking about congestion, okay? And I think the way that you address congestion, I think we already solved that problem. This thing called COVID came along, and you know what happened? Everybody started working from home. So I talked about this literally on the campaign trail 3 years ago. And I said, if you really wanted to lighten up congestion, there's a way to commute to work and you never have to leave your house. It's called telecommuting. It actually works very well for our industry. You can't be a waiter and telecommute. That's just not an option. But I've seen that a lot of the younger generations, they're fine with doing telecommute. And quite frankly, my experience with it personally was when we didn't lose productivity. I actually saw our productivity actually went up, which I would have never believed. Truthfully, I would have thought that would be the case. Because for me, I actually really enjoy being in the office setting. But they were able to get more things done. The work was better, and for the most part, we didn't miss deadlines. So not that we really ever did anyway, but of course we did. Not perfect, but so I think that's the first way to address the congestion problem. And then the second part, I think that my experience, and I'm letting history dictate here, but I'm not sure that there's going to be a mass adoption of that type of transit. I just think that mom wants her car that's got her stuff in it. I drive around the state all the time. So I think there's certain people, specifically in urban settings, where that's going to make a lot of sense. But the second you get out of the urban setting and you start getting in the suburbs and you start getting into rural areas, all of a sudden, I tried to get an Uber to go down to downtown Woodstock, and it still took 15 minutes to be able to get one. Go ahead.
Now granted, it's not going to be as convenient as jumping in your car and doing it, but Georgia Tech just deployed an app that works in conjunction with the Georgia MARTA service schedule to get people into the. Granted, it's a longer ride. You could probably get there a lot quicker, but it's cheaper. You don't have to worry about parking.
So that's why I go to downtown Woodstock. We get an Uber so we don't have to worry about parking, because it's such a pain to park down there. But so I'll tell you what, guys, we're getting pretty close. I'll take like one more question, maybe two, and then we're going to call it a wrap. That's 8 o'clock.
I will point out that the Society of Automotive Engineers does establish standards between the various manufacturers of vehicles. And the same is true of other things. For example, the card you just talked about between the Apple and the Android, guess what the other end of the cable can do?
What's that?
It plugs in anywhere.
That's true. Yeah, you're right.
Okay?
Yeah,
so
the USB.
We can, through I hate to say this, but California has forced innovations and cooperation between the various manufacturers for emission control and that kind of thing. You can legislate it in Georgia. You want to put something in Georgia, it has to meet one of these standards.
Yeah.
And that way, everybody comes in together. You don't legislate them, but you say, you got to be together because we're only going to have one design. And that's where we come back to the systems engineering. You got to kind of get there. You got to have that expertise within Georgia to do it. And as to the AV, I'll tell you, you could have already had an automated vehicle system for commuters with the technology that's been available for 15 or 20 years. But it has to be a restricted, specialized system designed by systems engineers.
Well, I love my systems engineers for sure. But I don't think the state needs to be getting involved in telling manufacturers what they should and shouldn't do. Hey, go ahead.
Okay.
You're my last one, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah. I got to get out of here.
As Luther had mentioned earlier on in his presentation, I gather there's research and development underway to make contactless charging a reality with the infrastructure. What I haven't heard anything questioned or mentioned this evening is relating to our HOT lane infrastructure policy, the high occupancy toll lanes. That is one of the mechanisms now in the highly developed areas that the state has gone to in order to be able to fund capacity expansion. They're also looking at it in terms of high occupancy vehicles and bus rapid transit. Where I'm going with this is there's an opportunity to combine technology when this contactless charging is available, to have that in dedicated lanes that can be metered and tolled on the vehicle while they're using it. Just food for thought.
Well, I think what you're going to get into with that, I understand the pragmatism. Sorry, I didn't say that right, but you follow me. Is you're going to have a lot of people who would get very upset because they're going to feel like you're tracking them as they're driving down the road, and people don't like their privacy messed with. It's just so I'm talking devil's advocate here. So, but if you were a policymaker and you say, well, we're going to put something in the road, it's going to track where you're driving and how far you drive, it's going to wind up having a lot of public opinion.
It's already there. The HOT lanes and the transponders in the vehicles that allow you to use those lanes. Yes, there's purportedly a privacy provision that the data being collected is benign. It's not being tagged to your vehicle, but they're charging a toll based on the time that vehicle is in that lane and the distance that it travels.
But I think we're commingling two different things. You're talking about HOV lanes. I'm talking about contactless power strips running across the whole state.
Well, I see toll lanes.
Yeah, so you're talking specific to toll lanes. So yeah, and I would agree with you. I actually agree with you on. I agree with you on that. Because it meters when you get on. That's why when I look at the sign. By the way, I'm going to take one of those on the way home. When you look at it, it tells you what your cost is going to be at whatever. Right. So they know when you get on and get off of it.
So
I don't disagree with you on that.
Distance travel where the need really is there for having an infrastructure for charging these vehicles to go the long distance. Where are most of those vehicles going to be? They're going to be on the highways. The infrastructure that has to be put in for autonomous vehicles, which, none of this is going to happen overnight. Even with this target deadline of 2028, 2032,
I think that's ambitious.
How many millions and tens of millions of gasoline-powered and diesel-powered automobiles are still going to be on the road for how long? So there's going to be decades of transition period to ramp this infrastructure up and to deal with the...
Do you want to know one of the biggest comments I get? I want to know when they go 100% electric because I'm going to buy my car the year before. I hear that. You wouldn't be shocked how many times I've heard that piece of information. But I think this just, it gets back to, we're very early. We're in the infancy of this right now, right? So, and what we're trying to do at the state level is be proactive and try to figure out how do we do a lot of this stuff? What makes sense? What fits into, I'm going to go ahead and let you know I'm a conservative. So, what fits into that conservative lens, which is something I'm going to put, that's how I'm going to view it through. And what does that mean, and how do we get to where we want to go, and how do you still have, so I'm not a big government person, but I do believe there is a place for it. So I think that how do you do it? By limiting government, minimizing red tape, doing things that make sense, common sense solutions, but letting the free market really decide how it wants to move. And I think that's what we're going to be looking at in the next several years. But I think the beginning of that big push is going to happen here in the next 6 months.
The challenge there is marrying that to some form of basic standardization so that we don't end up with a basket full of a whole bunch of different things that as time goes by, you can't get parts for one. And
no, I agree. The question isn't whether you standardize. The question is whose role is it to do it? See, so to me, my personal belief is it's not the government's place to standardize. It's engineering companies. It's the industry should be deciding what, and that they did this. Listen, this isn't new. I mean, ASME created boiler codes how many years ago? The state doesn't write boiler code in the state, but what it does is it references ASME. And I think that's kind of the way that I think if you want to really pull it together, we need to get technical societies together that want to do this, that have a common vision and goal, that are really the right people for the job. Because I can promise you, I love my realtor friends, but they're probably not going to feel as comfortable writing codes for what's best for the state when it comes to transportation and electric vehicles. So it's just, this is really, I'm used to running a calculation. I can tell you if it's good or bad based off my numbers. But in the world of public policy, I had to throw out everything that I know about logic and what's right and wrong. And you had to sit down and start looking at it through completely different perspectives. I can tell you, it was sometimes I sit and scratch my head and try to figure out, like, how did you get from here to here in your train of thought? You just completely blew my mind.
Engineering and science doesn't have anything to do with
no. So I'm going to say one anecdotal thing. I know you're trying to help me out here, but I have watched debates on things that you never would have thought that would be debated. Okay, I've watched literally a half-hour debate on how electrons work. This is state government. How electrons work. I watched debates. I'm trying to think. There was another really good one that I watched not too long ago. But on the law of supply and demand and how the law of supply and demand works. Now, this is the law of economics, and it's like the first law of economics. But I've watched these kind of debates happen, so it's interesting to sit down and be in my perspective and say, okay, well, you're kind of right about this part, and you're kind of right about this part, but both of y'all are wrong about most of it. But it's just a different world, and I think that, to me, I see a real reason for technical societies. My goal in life is to keep state government out of everybody's way and let the people that should be doing it make the right decisions. So I'll wrap it up with that one. Go ahead.
You got a couple of recruits now already.
Do it. Hey, listen. So capital projects. This is my passion in life. Okay, this is what I love. I really enjoy this, but I love this. And so we're hiring. We're growing. We've been very blessed. We've got more work than we know what to do with, and we have a very limited pool of engineers in the city, and it's not easy. So it's funny, when I started the business, I thought, well, getting business is going to be the hardest part. And then we started getting a lot of business, and I thought, how am I going to cash flow this? That's going to be my hardest part. Well, no, that was taken care of. The big man upstairs took care of that for me. So what did it leave me with? Now I'm like, well, I got to get employees, and I can't find them. So if anybody, train employees. Hey, be back there in the back, get out of high school, go to Georgia Tech or Southern or wherever you want to go. Come call me. We need help. So, all right, guys. Hey, you know what? Actually, we would. Believe it or not. Yeah, I'm not kidding. If you don't mind going in industrial spaces. Yeah, okay, we'll talk after. All right. Well, thank you. See, I already got help.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Big candidate from
Thank you. No problem.
on behalf of the chapter.
I'll treasure it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next meeting.
We hope you enjoyed this presentation given at one of the Atlanta Metro Chapter meetings of the Georgia Society of Professional Engineers, an affiliate of the National Society of Professional Engineers. To find out more about us or to join us, check us out at gspe.org.